valuable time. I hope you had a great weekend. We will continue with the free enterprise system that we started in relation to our country's economic system last week. This week we'll focus on the role of the consumer and the role of government, talk about what the government does to protect individuals, consumers, and businesses. We'll also talk about tax-supported safety net or welfare programs that help to create a simple level or a minimum in our society. And also yesterday was the official start date for our stock market competition. So we'll go over a couple of things that you need to know about that. And then I will show you how to start trading next week. And we'll be off and running. That competition will run from basically today through December 11th, the week before we take finals. And so the winning group, there'll be 3 groups in this period. There's the other 3 groups in period 2 tomorrow. And then you'll also be in a competition between first and third period groups as well. So plenty of chances to get some extra credit if you're interested in that. First thing we want you to do is go ahead and open up your Canvas homepage for Econ. And we'll get rolling. So from there, go ahead and go to modules and go to week number 9. So week number 9, this page right here, and we'll get started. Okay, so last week we took a look at basically private sectors and public sectors in our free enterprise system, and the difference between public and private goods, obviously. We focused a lot on public goods, things that are made not really with a profit in mind, but for the good of all society. And we'll focus more on the private side today. But remember that the public sector is made up by the federal government, the state government, county governments, local governments, things that are done for society. The private sector, which will be our focus today, is done for benefit. It's done for a profit. And so you want to be able to explain the role of the consumer, that would be people like you and me, in our free enterprise system. You also want to explain the role of government. What are the roles of those 2 different groups in the free enterprise system in which we have a public and a private sector? Be able to explain popular safety net programs and also regulatory agencies in the United States. And then there is a safety net assignment and a role of government's case study, which is very simple about licensing and why things are regulated there. So go ahead and click to next, and we'll get to our first page. I'll let you get to that. Okay. So remember last week we talked about basically there being 2 parts to our economic system, right? There was a private sector and a public sector. The private sector is basically made up of consumers, firms, and businesses. The public sector is made up generally of a government entity. So whether it be the U.S. federal government, the state government, such as California, county governments, such as County of Santa Barbara, or even a local entity like the city of Santa Maria. You also have other government agencies like a water district, that you'll find throughout. And it just really depends upon the state and the area that you live in terms of what we have. But in our economic system, the consumers play a role in our system, and the government also plays a role in our system. As consumers, as I said, myself and you, we make wishes known through purchases, right? We vote with dollars. Things that are going to be popular, things that we are going to see do very well are because a number of people buy them. The other thing that you'll notice is that citizens, consumers can form what's called interest groups. And those interest groups can form and raise money and lobby different legislative branches. So one of the most famous lobbying groups is the NRA, right? The National Rifle Association, protection of Second Amendment gun ownership issues. And so they collect dues and they basically pay lobbyists to make their wishes known on Capitol Hill, right? Where the government, especially the Senate and the House of Representatives, is located, to basically lobby for their position on various issues that would come across the court or come across the legislature in a particular bill that would be of interest to them. You also have the government. And so as you see the trend here through the last couple of weeks, there's a lot of either or a lot of two groups working in conjunction with each other. The government, as we had mentioned last week, provides us consumers a number of protectional constitutional rights. The two biggest being basically the right to own property and the right to freely enter into contracts and have those contracts upheld. The government, though, over a period of time, and it has really expanded since the 1930s, even as early as the late 1800s, early 1900s, right, with the monopolies, Carnegie Steel, Rockefeller. You had the Upton Sinclair novel about the meat packing, meat processing facilities, right? We need basically protection. We need regulations. And so you can see through the last more than 100 years, the government has provided consumers with information based on public disclosure laws, on regulations, or things that are seen as the best interest of society. And so you get information on vehicles and protection in vehicles. Ever since the 1950s, the federal government has mandated that vehicles have seat belts included when they are produced because it is seen as a public benefit to have that sort of protection. If you go into a grocery store and you pick up a particular product, you'll more than likely find a label on there that will include all of the ingredients in that product. It will also have nutritional information for you. The government has mandated that and made that a protection for all. The government regulates and oversees the pharmaceutical companies which provide medicines. That's why if you saw the news last night, right, Johnson & Johnson, which was in the third stage clinical trial of the COVID vaccine, has been paused because there's been an unexplained illness that had popped up in somebody that had been administered that. And so they need to determine, is that from the medicine, right? Is that from the vaccine, or is it something unrelated to that, but still out of abundance of caution, protecting public safety and protecting public health? The FDA, right, Food and Drug Administration, has said we need to pause this trial. And so when you talk about consumers and government, we each have a role, no matter what part of the enterprise system we are, and those usually work in conjunction to create a very large gross domestic product, a very large economic system. Go ahead and in your Canvas page, go ahead and click to the next page, and we'll talk about technology and productivity. Okay. So big news today, right? Big news today. Apple is unveiling what? Anybody hear or see that? What is Apple unveiling today? Should have done it about 27 minutes ago.
Is there a new iPhone?
Yeah, there you go. Thank you, Eduardo. Right? New iPhone. And so, generally these things come about in September, right? But we had all of the closures and all of the pandemics. This worldwide pandemic started in China, and a number of iPhones and parts that make up the iPhone are produced in China. And so China, with its population over 1 billion people, shut down plants, facilities, things like that would affect that. So this event usually takes place in September. You can see now it's almost middle of October in terms of what we have. But one of the things about our free enterprise system that is a positive is that the government, in its role, uses its powers and its regulatory procedures to allow for technology and productivity to flourish. And so, quite frankly, right, when we think about technology, technology is the process used to make a good or service. Technological improvements allow for more production from the same or smaller quantities of inputs. And that goes back to our production possibilities curve, right, from the second or third week. Remember, we talked about point X, which was outside of the curve, farther away from the origin. The only way that we could get there is with a technological advancement or an increase in people, increase in population. You need some sort of better use of the resources you have, or an increase in one of the factors of production to be able to produce more than you were before. Technological improvements allowed for our country's gross domestic product to increase significantly over time. Our country is the leader when it comes to the amount of goods and services produced since the Industrial Revolution. It's not close, right? So if you take all of the goods and services produced since the 1850s, our gross domestic product has far outgrown any other country in the world. And what it allows for is inventions, right? It allows for inventions such as a new iPhone, right? And these presentations that come out. And so the government's role in technology is going to be really twofold. So why would a company like Apple take the risk to spend millions of dollars to develop a new iPhone once every year, once every 2 years, if they couldn't profit off of it? They wouldn't do it, right? But one of the things about our free enterprise system, and as I said before, this is specifically about the United States. If you go to a different country, if you go to a European Union country, if you go somewhere in South America, you go to Australia, they have different rules for their economic system. This is only about the United States of America. Our government's role in technology is basically to protect those who are going to take the risk to improve something or invent something new. And they do that in one of two ways. There are things called patents and there's things called copyrights. A patent is an exclusive right to produce and sell a product. That would be, right, your new iPhone. So if we brought this up, and let's see if they've unveiled it yet. It was supposed to be at 10 a.m. our time. Helps if I spell iPhone instead of just phone, right? New iPhone today. Let's see what it comes up with. See if they've got anything up. So iPhone 12 launch event. So it looks like it'll be i12 phone. So Apple's new iPhone expected to come in 4 variations with LED screens and 5G support. So the 5G would be something new, I think, over the 11. While the iPhone 12 mini will likely be a popular pick for many, we could see an iPhone 12 Pro range, 120 hertz displays, HomePod in terms of mini, AirPod Studio, and AirPower. So when you look at this, right, when you look at this, why would Apple develop a new iPhone if they couldn't benefit from it, right? Because it's going to take production, it's going to take money. That's where patents come in. So as they get the idea and as they get the plans, Apple basically applies for a patent on this device and on the new devices that they're going to release today. And what that does is in the United States, it gives them exclusive rights to produce and sell that product. They're the only ones. Otherwise, right, Samsung could come in, instead of producing a Galaxy, they could just knock off the iPhone 12. Now, when we talk about music and we talk about television and we talk about movies, that's where the government's role in technology is known as a copyright. So a copyright is the exclusive right to publish and sell creative works. And you've seen this quite a bit if you've looked anywhere on YouTube, right? So, and it'll even happen to me. If we went to YouTube and we clicked on, you could think of anything too. So let's say the show Friends, right? You click on Friends, unless they own the content, right? So this is TBS, and they had reruns of Friends. So unless you own the content, you're not allowed, right, to use that or profit off of it in any way. So you are unable to do that. This is specific to, right, those who are the ones that published it or sold the rights. So if you've noticed, right, in the past couple of months, NBC has a new online streaming service for televisions and shows and content called Peacock Network. Netflix used to have the rights to Friends, right? And they paid millions of dollars to NBC for that. It just depends. The NFL, right? National Football League, they own the rights to their content and they sell that to ABC, to ESPN, to CBS and Fox to broadcast over the air. When you go to a different country, if you go to Britain, for example, Britain's largest television network is the BBC. There is no copyright protection, right? The way that we see it. You could stream a British show. You could stream something from Britain a lot easier than you could stream it from the United States. But our government's role in technology to increase and encourage these developments is to protect companies that take the risk. So if you take the risk on a new product, such as the iPhone 12, you're going to get a patent on that. If you're Apple, you're going to be able to sell that exclusively as you see fit. If you take the risk, like NBC did with Friends, you're going to get the exclusive rights to publish and sell that creative work from now until the end of time in this country, right? It doesn't work the same other ways. Now, when you get into a patent is exclusive rights to produce and sell a product. There are three different patent types. There's a utility patent type, a design patent type, and a plant patent type. Utility type protects the processes, machines, and manufactured items. That's what the iPhone 12 would be, right? It's going to be a utility patent that protects the processes of manufactured items. So basically your chemical creation of medicine is a utility patent. Any type of electronics is going to be a utility patent. If you are in car manufacturing or shoe manufacturing, like a different pair of Air Jordans, those are going to be design patents. So new, original, ornamental designs for manufactured items, such as the design of the new Ford Mustang, the design of the Tesla Model X. All of those things would be protected. That's why you can't take a Chevy Corvette and use that design and sell it with Ford, Nissan, Toyota, what have you, because Chevy owns the design patent on that. And then lastly, there is a plant patent, and those are asexually produced and distinct plant varieties, right? Basically where you take two types of apples and come up with a new type of manufactured apple that didn't exist before in nature. And so that is two ways that the government plays a role in our free enterprise system by protecting and encouraging technology and productivity. All right, let's talk a little bit about regulatory agencies. So go ahead and switch to the next page. All right, so another thing that the government does besides encourage technology and an increase in productivity is also regulatory in nature. And so a couple of things. Basically, the government encourages innovation, technology, productivity in a free market enterprise. They also regulate these goods and services to make sure that the people are safe. And they also provide what are called safety net programs that provide a minimum level in our society. And so we'll look at the last two here. Regulatory agencies are simply agencies of the federal government, generally, that implement and enforce laws, regulate certain sectors of the economy. That would be a microeconomic policy, and they are generally overseen by Congress. Now, each state generally has regulatory agencies. Each county may have regulatory agencies, and even some cities have a regulatory agency, right, that oversees certain things. So a couple of your most common, and I just put the ones really that you probably have heard or affect your life. One is the Food and Drug Administration, right? It makes sure that food is pure, that it's safe, that drugs that come out are safe with no side effects, and then also it covers cosmetics. So one thing about Food and Drug Administration, your shampoo is tested to make sure that it doesn't cause cancer, that it doesn't cause skin irritation, things like that. So that's something that you may not have known. The Federal Trade Commission ensures fair competition and protects consumers. So no false advertising. Your Federal Communications Commission, right? Your radio, your telephone, back in the days of the telegraph, television, also satellite TV now. So each new medium of exchange would be covered there. And generally, the FCC, for the most part, is going to regulate a little bit the internet, but that just depends on what the situation is and what the issue might be. Your FAA is your Federal Aviation Administration. That comes out of the 1978 Deregulation Act that we talked about last week, right? When we talked about airline tickets and how airline tickets really are cheaper now than they were 40 years ago. They are in charge of air transportation. So Kobe Bryant's helicopter crash, any plane crash, any aviation crash is going to be investigated by that group. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission basically looks at Title VIII issues and civil rights issues in employment. You can't discriminate based on color, race, gender. Your EPA, I think, was Nixon administration, maybe in the late 60s, early 70s. A lot of acid rain issues in the 70s back on the East Coast. But basically the Environmental Protection Agency, right, establishes and enforces pollution standards. We had factories that were just dumping basically crud out of the factories into rivers instead of dealing with it. OSHA is your regulation work conditions. And so those, if you have a job, those are those posters, right? If you're hurt on the job, what to do. If you see an unsafe working condition, what to do. Your Consumer Protection Agency ensures federal standards. So when you get a recall on toys, that is generally the CPSC. Your Nuclear Regulatory Commission licenses and regulates non-military nuclear facilities. So this would be Diablo Canyon. This would be Santa Fe, which was just north of Oceanside. I think they shut that down. There's a Palo Verde nuclear power plant outside of Phoenix on the west side out on the Interstate 10. So any of those nuclear generating stations are regulated by that group. And then lastly, the biggest one, probably day to day for you, your parents, myself, is going to be the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. After the Great Depression, where thousands of people lost millions of dollars from banks because they just did not have the money, the federal government stepped in and said, we're not going to allow that to happen again. So to rebuild faith in our banking system, the federal government insures your deposits on your accounts up to $250,000 per person. And so basically what that means is in the 1980s, we had a savings and loan scandal, Arizona and Texas, I believe it was. And basically those banks just closed up one day and everybody was gone. The federal government stepped in and paid those people their deposits. And so we know, right, that when you put money into a bank, the federal government backs that up. And so, you know, outside the end of the world, if your money's in a bank that's FDIC insured, you're going to get your money. This here is about a 9-minute clip going over a couple of things that we talked about previously, and then what and the reasons why regulatory agencies are needed. So I'll show this to you real quick. Increase the volume so you'll be able to hear it. And then we'll talk about your safety net programs.
I'm Craig, and this is Crash Course Government and Politics. And today I'm going to talk a bit more about economic policy. Ran into the table there a little bit. Ooh, economic policy can be dangerous. Specifically, we're going to look at some of the broad goals of economic policy and some of the things that the government does to try to accomplish those goals. And we may even provide some examples of times when the government did accomplish them. So take that, skeptics.
Oh, TV seen this?
A lot of the time the goals are just goals. All people have goals and aspirations except me. And the government, since it's made up of people, is no different. Well, I do have one goal. To punch the eagle again. And I did it. Accomplished. Well, actually, the government's different because its economic goals are much bigger and more important than, say, my goal of punching the eagle again. Although I would argue my goal is pretty important. So, what are these goals of economic policy? The first goal is promoting stable markets. We talked about how the government structures the market system in the last episode, so I probably don't need to repeat it. At least I hope I don't. You should have been paying attention. But since nobody wants a malfunctioning market, most of the things the government does to create a market system also work to make the system stable and predictable. Maintaining law and order and minimizing monopolies are examples of government actions that make the market system stable. I didn't know the government maintained law and order. Oh, not the TV show. Okay. One of the more interesting ways, interesting to me, that the government keeps markets predictable is through national regulations of things like automobile fuel efficiency standards. If there were no national regulations and states were allowed to set the rules, then it might be possible for car makers in Detroit to build cars that live up to the mileage standards in Michigan, but not in California, and that would be anarchy. Well, maybe not anarchy exactly, but it wouldn't be good, and it'd make it much more difficult for manufacturers to know what kind of cars to make. Also, do you really want California, the state with the biggest population, making rules for the rest of us? Of course you don't. The second major goal of economic policy is promoting economic prosperity. Here's another example of a situation where many people will tell you that the best way for the government to promote prosperity is to get out of the way. And they may have a point, but the government doesn't stop trying. So what does the government do to promote prosperity? For one thing, it tries to keep a positive investment climate and build confidence in the economy. One way the federal government can accomplish this is through regulating financial markets through the Securities and Exchange Commission, since people won't want to invest in the securities markets if they think the game's fixed. Another thing the government can do, if it's feeling particularly Keynesian, is to spend money on public investment in things like highways and the internet. While not actually built by Al Gore, it did begin with a government program out of the Defense Department. The government also pays for research through the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation, and enhances the workforce through education policy and immigration policy, all of which contribute to national prosperity. Another, and by no means last, way that the government can try to make the country more prosperous is by keeping inflation low. You can find out more about inflation from Crash Course Economics, but the main tool the government uses to control inflation is the Federal Reserve. which is so complicated that it gets its own episode. Third goal of government economic policy, one closely related to the first two, is promoting business development. Many people would probably argue that promoting business development and promoting prosperity are the same thing, but policies aimed at helping businesses are slightly different and more focused than those targeting the broader goal of promoting prosperity. The main ways that the federal government promotes business development are through tariffs and subsidies. Since the Great Depression, the U.S. has pretty much pursued a policy of free trade, which means lowering tariffs on most things, which by forcing them to compete can hurt businesses, at least in the short run. In the past, however, high tariffs allowed American businesses to develop free from foreign competition, and this helped to make the U.S. the most powerful industrial nation in the world. Can we use that libertage from U.S. history? I think yes. Subsidies are very controversial, and they come in two forms. Grants and aid for things like transportation, building those superhighways again, provide an indirect subsidy to businesses who don't have to pay for the roads they use to ship the goods they make. Most people don't complain about this type of subsidy because they can be looked at as a public good. Direct subsidies are another issue. These include direct assistance to businesses through the Small Business Administration and government investment in firms like Semitech and, more recently and more controversially, Solyndra. Many people don't think that the government should be in the business of investing in business and that these subsidies provide the businesses that receive them with an unfair advantage. Farm subsidies are probably just as controversial. They were put in place to help farmers during the Great Depression, but these days critics worry that most of the subsidies go to corporate farms. The fourth goal of government economic policy is to protect consumers and employees. A lot of people will tell you that the federal government doesn't do much to protect employees these days, and those people are probably right. But in the past, it certainly did. The government made unionization easier with the National Labor Relations Act and set labor standards, especially overtime rules with the Fair Labor Standards Act. Both of these were passed in the 1930s, by the way. Probably the most notable thing the government does to protect workers these days is set the federal minimum wage. But since that topic is being hotly debated as this episode is being produced in 2015, I can't really comment on how it's going to turn out. On the other hand, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration does set up regulations to prevent workers from breathing in hazardous fumes and protect them from other potentially life-threatening workplace conditions. And that's a good thing. As far as consumers are concerned, there are thousands of regulations that protect us to make sure that the things we buy don't kill or maim us. The Food and Drug Administration makes sure that our medicines aren't poison, and the Department of Agriculture inspects meat, which I think is really a good idea. Actually, the National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act of 1966 made cars safer, and the Consumer Products Safety Commission helps keep lead paint out of our toys and saves us from exploding toasters. I like explosions as much as the next guy, but not with breakfast. These goals of economic policy, promoting stable markets, promoting economic prosperity, fostering business development, and protecting employees and consumers are interrelated and important. I'll leave it up to you to decide if one of these is more important than the other three, because that makes for excellent dinner conversation, if your dinner parties are mostly about the role the government plays in our economy. Please invite me to those dinner parties. I'm hungry for roast beef and political debate. So to shift gears a little, let's talk history and how the government's role in regulating the economy has changed in the last 240 years or so. So you probably remember from back when we talked about the transition from congressional to presidential government that began with Teddy Roosevelt and really came into its own with Franklin Roosevelt, that before the 20th century, the federal government didn't really do that much. A lot of that has to do with fiscal policy and taxation, which we're going to discuss in another episode, and maybe that dinner you're going to invite me to. But some of it was certainly because of the way that the Supreme Court had interpreted the Commerce Clause to mean that government regulation was suspect. And by suspect, I mean generally not allowed. But by the end of the 19th century, the federal government's regulatory power had begun to change, and that has to do with one of my favorite subjects. No, not Star Wars. And no, not the protection of endangered species. I'm talking about railroads. Yeah, let's go to the thought bubble. So with the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869, travel and communication across the U.S. became much easier, and it was possible for the first time to have a national market for goods. If you raised cattle in Kansas, you could now easily ship beef to New York or San Francisco. Railroads were, almost by definition, interstate entities, so it was pretty clear that Congress could regulate them. And they needed regulation because railroads had a nasty habit of discriminatory pricing, charging much, much more for some shippers than others. Something had to be done, and Congress stepped in with the Interstate Commerce Act in 1887, which created the Interstate Commerce Commission to regulate railroads. The period of time around the turn of the 20th century in the U.S. is known as the Gilded Age, and is associated with runaway capitalism and the creation of modern corporate structures and industrial capitalists like Andrew Carnegie, or Carnegie if you will, and John D. Rockefeller, who are heroes to some and villains to others. In response to some of the abuses of the Gilded Age, Congress passed the first wave of regulatory legislation. In addition to the ICC, Congress created the Federal Trade Commission to regulate trade, and the Sherman and Clayton Acts to try to counter the problem of monopolies. These antitrust laws are the basis of modern antitrust regulation and have been used against Standard Oil and Microsoft. The first wave of economic regulation didn't have huge effects on the economy, certainly not greater than the effects of, say, World War I. In the 1920s, the federal government returned to a more traditional laissez-faire approach, which lasted until the Great Depression swept Herbert Hoover and the Republicans out of office and Franklin Roosevelt into it. And with Franklin Roosevelt came the New Deal and the advent of what law schools sometimes like to call the administrative and regulatory state. Thanks, Thought Bubble. We're not going to go into details about the various laws and regulations of the New Deal here, but luckily I think John talked about them in Crash Course U.S. History. John, he talks about stuff. But in general, those regulations meant the federal government would take an active role in regulating certain sectors of the economy, like agriculture and transportation. Sometimes technology played a part. There really wasn't a need for a federal aviation administration until there were airplanes. The next big wave of government regulation happened in the early 1970s under, of all people, President Nixon. These new regulatory laws were different from their New Deal predecessors in that they focused on the economy as a whole. For example, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration dealt with all occupations, or at least most of them, and the EPA was created to protect the whole country's environment. Beginning in the 1980s with Ronald Reagan, or actually before him under Carter, the federal government has undertaken various initiatives to deregulate the economy. But we already talked about deregulation in our episode on taming the bureaucracy, so we don't need to rehash that here. The point to remember is that despite attempts at deregulation, the administrative regulatory state appears to be here to stay. So why do we have an administrative regulatory state now, even though so many people complain about it? Part of the reason has to do with the remarkable staying power of bureaucracies, which are harder to kill than Wolverine. Nowadays, the federal government not only has economic goals like increasing prosperity that most of us agree upon, it also has a sense, maybe even a belief, that it should try to achieve those goals. This is a long way from the view of the federal government that persisted through the 19th century, one which many people say was handed down by the framers. But times change, and the world, and the U.S., has gotten much more complex. Economic concerns take up an increasingly large part of our lives, and many of them, especially big macroeconomic policies, require big solutions. And for many Americans, but certainly not all of them, the best solution we have is government. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Crash Course Government and Politics is produced in association with PBS Digital.
All right, so when we look at those regulatory agencies, basically meant to provide a set of rules, a set of guidelines for our country and our economic system, protecting consumers, basically protecting consumers. So lastly, the third thing the government does is basically redistribute some of society's wealth. And so what I did was I created, and this is on your assignment, you'll be able to use this, so you don't need to write this down. But basically there are what I have broken into 3 areas, and we're probably moving into a 4th, right? Or just started a 4th based on the 2016 election. But in the 1930s, 1940s, and 1950s that he had mentioned in the video, the government really didn't take too much of an interest in the economy. The Interstate Commerce Act was an exception, but really government did not interfere or regulate in many ways the way it does now. But when you had something like the Great Depression that was so much worse than anything that had happened before, what the government does under Roosevelt and his New Deal plan is basically expand the role of government in its regulatory practices and in its support or defense of the economic system. And so programs like Social Security, which provide pensions to retired employers, the Civil Works Act, the Public Works Act, the Works Project Administration, Truman and his Fair Deal, which established a minimum wage in this country for the first time in the late 1940s. Federal aid to war veterans coming back from World War II. This was an expansion of government into the economy that we've never seen before. Now in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, what you see is more of a protective role. So Lyndon Johnson takes over after Kennedy's assassination, creates what's called the Great Society. He expands welfare, school funding. This is when kindergarten funding starts, creation of the Job Corps, something that picks up off of Kennedy's Peace Corps. Medicare is created, Medicaid is created. Medicare is health for those on Social Security, those who are retired. Medicaid is aid and medical insurance for those that are poor below a certain level. And then you have the food stamp program created. and that's established nationwide. Now, what you see in the 90s and the 2000s is generally a sort of a shrinkage, and I would say almost a cutting of some of these programs. President Clinton replaces basically welfare with what's called the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, the TANF. And what he does is make a deal with the Republicans. So Clinton was a Democrat elected in 92 and 96, serves from 93 to 2001. And he made a deal with the Republicans to get this passed through Congress. And it basically allowed for welfare and funding, but also a limit on how long you could be on welfare. And in exchange for that, he got Republicans to agree to pay for job training, for college education for these people that were in the lower levels of economic society. President Bush continues this shrinkage. He is elected in 2000 and 2004, serves from 01 to 09. And he basically creates a program in which private religious organizations, private companies can compete for federal funding on welfare programs. You had, under the Obama administration, Obama two-term president, elected in 08 and 12, serves from 9 until 17, sort of tried to expand upon some of these issues. And then when you had Trump win his election in 16 and start serving in 17, there was a number of shrinkage back to what you would see in the 90s and 2000s. So we'll have to see who wins this election and then what role that president will play with in terms of Congress and society. But there's a number of different things that go on, but it's really the Great Depression that starts these safety net programs. And we call them safety net programs because there's a certain level in our society that we don't want people, families to fall below, because it is not basically safe. It's not good for society. And if we, the argument is, don't provide these programs, it's going to cost us more down the road in maybe medical costs, mental health, institutional costs, things like that. And so that's why people look at that situation and want to know what goes on. Go ahead and click next. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about your stock market game, and then tell you what you need to do before next week, and you'll be done. Okay, so a couple of things. In this class, let me look at my sheets here. So in this class, in this section of period 2, you're going to have 3 groups. One group will be made up of 6 people. The other 2 groups will be made up of 7. There'll be 3 groups in Wednesday's period 2 class. You guys will compete against each other, and then you'll compete against period 1 and period 3. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to give you $100,000. And that $100,000, your group is going to be able to spend on stocks, on bonds, and mutual funds. And let me show you what a portfolio will look like. I will show you mine. I am team 7 in all of these periods here, so I will compete against you as well. Okay, so your group is going to be given $100,000 to spend. As you can see, the cash balance, because of interest, you have already made money because it technically started yesterday. And so basically what you're going to do is you're going to be able to buy stocks, mutual funds, or bonds. And you don't have to worry. We're going to go over all of those things and what they mean and how you can look those things up. And basically you want to make as much as you can in profit between now and December 11th. Now, we'll talk a lot over this period about diversification. So diversification means that when you're doing this for real in your retirement, you want to have a diversity of basically investment options. So in my family's case, I've got a pension from Arizona and from California in terms of teaching. I have a 403B account. I also have a mutual fund with Voya, and then I also have a couple of bonds and some stocks. And so when you diversify, you basically spread out and minimize your risk in one particular area. So when they talk about diversification, and we'll focus on that, that's what we're looking on. But these basic concepts you'll be able to use as you go out into the real world and have a good retirement portfolio. And a portfolio would be all the things that you're using for your retirement. So a couple of things about the game, a couple of things about what a company is, and then how to look up and see what a stock symbol is, a ticker symbol. I'll show you a website that I use to look up various things, and then I'll explain what your groups are. Your groups, as I said, are going to be basically 3 groups, one of 6, one of 7, another one of 7. And so these will be your groups here. Group 1 will be Eduardo, Lily, Kai, Jacob, Rayanne, Dylan. Group 2 will be Julian, Jacob C, Sam, Alexis, Maria, Amy, Jonathan. Group 3 will be Dom, Alyssa, Israel, Audrey, Natalie, Isaiah, Emily. And I'll put these back up and share your logins with you next week when you need them. But those groups will be your stock competition. All right, so this is going to go over why we invest. Short-term goals, they're going to ask you about a short-term goal. Short-term goal, basically for this class, is just going to be to make as much money as we can in 2 months. So our philosophy is going to be a little bit different than long-term. Long-term goal is you want to see what you want to do in real life in terms of your investment.
Chapter 1, why is investing important? In this video, we're going to learn short-term versus long-term goals, saving versus investing, emergency funds, risk, and why the stock market game is relevant to you. Saving means money not spent. Saving money means that you're putting a portion of your money from your allowance, birthday present, part-time job, or other source in a piggy bank or bank account. You may be saving your money for a short-term goal. A short-term goal is something you want to do in the near future. The near future can mean today, this week, this month, or even this year. Some examples of short-term financial goals are saving money to buy a bike, a new pair of shoes, or a video game. It may also include saving money to build an emergency fund. An emergency fund comes in handy when you must pay for an unforeseen event, like a flat tire, or a future event, like a cousin's birthday. It's also useful if you're out of work and still need to pay bills, buy food, and pay for other expenses. You can use the money you saved up in your emergency fund while you're looking for a new job. Now take a minute to write down 2 short-term financial goals you may have.
So as I said, the short-term goal is basically going to be to make as much money as we can in this stock market project.
Long-term goal is something you want to do in the future. Long-term goals are usually several years away. Examples of long-term financial goals are paying for college, buying a home, or even your own retirement. Now take a minute to write down 2 long-term financial goals you may have.
Long-term financially, I just want you to be able to understand what a diversified retirement portfolio is, and then some of the basics for that. So basically, why invest in stocks, and why would you make money from stocks? Same thing with a mutual fund. What is a mutual fund, and how do I make money from that? Bonds are very, very simple, but are also part of a diversified portfolio. And then your 401 or 403 accounts, basically what are those? Roth IRAs, regular IRA, things like that, just so that you have a basis of knowledge to start your own retirement fund.
Your bike to a faraway destination. Saving your money can get you there, but it may take a long time. That's where investing comes in. Investing is when you buy something with the expectation that it will earn you money over time. Driving your car can take you a lot further than riding your bike for the same amount of time. Investing is a way to earn more money in the same amount of time it would take to save it. However, investing is riskier than saving. Risk is the possibility of loss. Investing is riskier than saving because there's the possibility that your investments don't grow. However, investors willingly take on the additional risk because of the potential to earn more money than just saving it in a piggy bank or bank account. There are also other perks to investing. Investors invest in companies they believe in. Whether your passion is medicine, the environment, advocating for diversity and equity, or other, you can drive innovation, growth, and change for what you're passionate about by investing your money. So, why is the stock market game relevant to you? In the stock market game, you'll learn all about investing. Our goal is to fill your brain with investing knowledge so one day, when you have enough money saved up, you can invest safely and wisely to achieve your long-term goals, whatever they may be, and make the world a better place. Exit ticket.
So a couple of things about that. And they make this point, but I just want to emphasize this. Outside of putting your money into a financial institution that is FDIC insured, all investing is going to have risk. So bond purchases will have risk, mutual fund purchases will have risk, retirement accounts will have risk, stocks will have risk, right? Anybody tells you different is not telling you the truth. So that is the only safe way, right, to put your money in to a financial institution. Now, a financial institution has many different things you do, checking, savings. They also have what's called certificates of deposits, where you basically deposit a chunk of cash with a financial institution, and then a year later, 5 years later, whatever term you decide, the longer it is, the more interest rate you get, or the larger interest rate you get, you'll get that money plus what you were guaranteed to have. So I just want to make sure that that is clear. So what is a company, right? We really haven't talked about that, but what is a company? And then we'll talk about a ticker symbol.
Chapter 2. What is a company? In this video, we're going to learn what's a company, product, brand, public company, and private company. Do you know the name of this soda? Do you know who makes it? How about this one? Who makes this one? Sodas, Pepsi and Pepsi Wild Cherry, are two products made by the same company, PepsiCo. A company is a business formed to manufacture or supply products or services for profit. A product is an item sold by a company. Regular Pepsi and Pepsi Wild Cherry are both products of the company PepsiCo. Do you recognize these? What do they all have in common? There are three brands from the same company, again, PepsiCo. A brand is the name a company gives a product it makes or a service it provides. In this instance, Pepsi Soda, Doritos Corn Chips, and Cheetos Cheese Snacks are all brands of the same company, PepsiCo. There are two different types of companies, private and public companies. A public company is a company whose shares can be purchased, meaning an investor can purchase a piece of the company. A private company is a company that's privately owned by a group of people. Shares cannot be purchased. Mexico is a public company. This means you can own a part of it by buying its stock. As a part owner, you make money when the company makes money. Now think about the clothes you wear, the games you play, and the food you like. Do you have a favorite pair of Levi's jeans? Do you play Minecraft? Or do you like Big Macs? These products are made by public companies that you can own a part of, but more on that in the next video. We'd like you to answer, what's the difference between a product, a brand, and a company?
All right, so one of the things I'll have you do, and we'll talk about this in a minute, is think about two companies that you think your group should invest in. All right, and when you think about those two groups or two companies that your group should invest in, how are we going to determine whether their stock is available and what is their ticker symbol? And this explains that.
Chapter 3, what is a stock and ticker symbol? In this video, we're going to learn about stocks, ticker symbols, exchanges, subsidiaries, and parent companies. Stock means owning shares or part of a company. If you think of a company as a pizza pie, your stock would be owning a slice of that pie. Companies issue stocks to raise money for a variety of reasons, including expanding their businesses and modernizing their operations. Investors buy stocks with the expectation that the companies they invest in will increase in value over time and earn them money. So how do stocks earn money over time? Let's backtrack first and talk about ticker symbols. A ticker symbol is a unique group of letters that identifies a company's stock on an exchange. An exchange is a marketplace to buy and sell stocks. For example, the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange are two marketplaces you may have heard of. An easy way to search for a company's ticker symbol is by typing in the company's name on a financial news and information site like Yahoo Finance. You can see that Twitter's ticker is TWTR, and its stock price today is $37.12 per share. So how do stocks earn money over time? If the stock price is more than what you paid for it, your investment increases in value and is earning you money. If the stock price is less than what you paid for it, your investment decreases in value and is losing you money. However, you can't lose more money than the original price you paid for the stock. When searching for companies, you're going to have to recall what you learned in the Chapter 2, What is a Company video. For example, one roadblock you may run into when searching for a company is typing in a brand instead. A brand is the name a company gives a product it makes or a service it provides. If I were to type in Doritos, I'd hit a roadblock because Doritos isn't a company. It's a brand of PepsiCo. Instead, I would need to type in PepsiCo to get the ticker. When I invest in PepsiCo, I'll be investing in their brand Doritos and its other brands. We also learned that some companies are private. You may run into a roadblock when searching for a private company. A private company is a company that is privately owned by a group of people. Shares cannot be purchased. So if I were to type in Staples, I'd hit a roadblock because Staples is a private company. If you can't find the ticker for a company, it may be because it's a subsidiary. A subsidiary is a company that is 50% or more owned by another company called a parent company. I type in Marvel. I hit a roadblock because Marvel Studios is a subsidiary of the Walt Disney Company, the parent company. easily find a company's ticker, don't give up. This is a challenge for you to find out why. A simple Google search for company ticker symbol is sure to put you on the right track. Let's circle back to our focus topic. We want you to answer, what is a stock and what is a ticker?
Okay. So they mentioned the same site that I would recommend that you use. And the reason I use this, I'll show you, is if you go to finance.yahoo.com, it is pretty, I would say pretty informative on a number of different topics. So you can see here, right, even the big news of the day, the Apple event unveiling the iPhone 12 and the iPhone 12 Pro, Amazon Prime Day, the official start of the holiday, various news about what's going on. And so you can click here and get stories on what happens. So if you look at Apple event, it'll give you a basic description of what is going on. But the reason that I like this is the same thing that she showed you, is you can search different companies. So maybe you're interested in Tesla. Tesla is available in stocks. It's on the NASDAQ market. You can see that a share of Tesla stock is $447.01. It's basically up $4.50, $4.60. Here it tells you as well, right? Facebook, $275 a share. Netflix, $544.91 a share. Amazon is up to $34.90 a share. And you go through, it will also give you top 10. It will give you the most traded. It will give you trending. So trending is basically your companies that are most active today in terms of trending one way or the other. Actives are the most traded. Gainers, you can see which stocks here have gained the most, which have lost the most. And then there's also a spot for mutual funds, currencies, a number of different things here. Here is airline industry news. Tesla cuts prices of Model S in the United States, right? So maybe that is why Tesla is trending the way it is. But I use this as a way to check out, right, what is going on and what is simple. You can see Tesla, Pepsi, Twitter, same things that she looked up are all still available there. Now, the one thing about Twitter, like when she went in, one of the things that you want to understand is you can check out how this is doing today. So you can see today it's down, right? It opened, it looked at 48.25 and it's down to 47.38. How it's done in the last 5 days, though, how it's done in the last month, you can see it's trending up. 6 months, still a trend up. Year to date, looks like mostly a trend up. You can see it's had a low of 24.48. So it has increased in value this year, almost 50%, right? We've gone from 32.54. It went down to 24.48, and now it's back almost up 50% or doubled what it was worth. So you can see trends there and sort of see how those things go. As I said, all I want you to do with regards to this is think about two companies that you think your group might be interested in pursuing. So as I said, I'll share these groups and your logins with you next week. But Lily, Kai, Jacob, Rayanne, Dylan, your group 1. Julian, Jacob, Sam, Alexis, Maria, Amy, Jonathan, your group 2. And then group 3 will be Dom, Alyssa, Israel, Audrey, Natalie, Isaiah, Emily, for this stock market competition. And I'll give you time in class to do that, and we'll talk about different things, but it's just sort of a good thing to do. So you don't even need to write that down, but just in your mind, think of two things in terms of companies that you may be interested in your group buying and purchasing. And then I'll show you guys how to do a stock trade next week. The only other two things I need you to do is this tax-supported safety nets. And this is just your most common safety net programs in the United States. Basically, what is the form of aid and who gets it? And that comes from the notes that I shared there. That's why I told you didn't have to write that down. And then the last thing before we meet next Tuesday is your case study. And your case study is basically dealing with regulations and licenses from the government, part of its regulatory and protective portion of the free enterprise system. So you've been cutting hair for about 3 years, but you're now attending an out-of-state college. You want to get a job at a salon, but you don't have a barber's license. You're not sure if a barber's license in one state is valid in another state. You want to know what other jobs require a license. So there is a research article here. And as you can see, it says occupational licensing is the legal requirement that a credential be obtained in order to practice a profession. Real estate has that. To be a teacher has that. To be a doctor has that. To be a lawyer has that. So these are the links here to these articles, and then you're just going to fill that in and submit that again. So those 2 items, this is the first assignment. This is the second assignment, along with thinking about what would be best in terms of companies that you may want to invest in, is what you need to do between now and next Tuesday. And I'll stay here if you have any questions. Other than that, we will see you then. Have a great week. Let me know if you have any questions or concerns on anything. I'll help you as much as I can. We'll see you then.
Bye, Mr. Grock. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Take care.
You too.
Thank you.
So we aren't starting the stock game this week then?
You what?
Are we starting the stock game this week then?
You'll make your first trades next week.
Okay.
All you have to do is think of 2 companies that you want your group to buy.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
You bet.
Bye. Have a good day.
You too. Thanks.
All right. Have a good one.
Take care. We'll see you later, Dom.
Later.